I'd like to begin today by introducing you to the best appliance you've never heard of. It's called the Juicero. This is a $700 device that will perfectly squeeze a juice packet into a cup for you. Now, it looks like the video's not playing, but what you would see is that you place a proprietary juice packet into this device and it squeezes it into a cup. Now, what they failed to understand is that you can just squeeze the juice packet into a cup. So it was a solution to a problem that really never existed. And it helped me understand that most everything we do in education and corporation are set up to find a solution. And rarely do we stop and look for the actual problem. I'm Cort Corwin. I'm an engineer, product innovator. And for 25 years, I've come up with a few ideas that I'd like to share today. And ideas around how we educate and also how we structure companies, and why that may be responsible for reducing the creativity we had as children. So for 25 years, I've worked on some of the most amazing products imaginable. And along the way, I've made observations on creativity that I'd like to share. The talk will be in two parts. One, creative intelligence, and two, creative behaviors. So I'd like to start today with creative intelligence by telling a short story. And for those of you who know how I tell stories, we're limited by time, so you can relax. 5 years ago, a group of us engineers and designers were trying to find a product concept for the Consumer Electronics Show. And we were struggling for days, not having any luck. And these were some of the smartest people I'd ever met. And then something amazing happened. A group of fourth graders from a nearby STEM program stopped by our office. It was called Homegrown. And what Homegrown does is they partner with local businesses so we can teach them innovation and design thinking skills. Now, if you ever want to liven up your office in the afternoon, invite 38-year-olds in, okay? We're talking photocopying faces, 2 kids stapled their pant legs together, 3 got stuck in the elevator. I think they got out. Pretty sure they got out. It was bedlam. But after we calmed them down, something magical happened, actually. The creativity they had was contagious. It was energetic. And we felt somewhat creatively inferior, which has never happened. And it was at that time that we all thought about this and said, like, where did that creativity go as our fourth grade self? It disappeared. So this troubled me deeply, being in innovation. So I thought about this and I reflected back on my education. And my education, I realized, pretty much solely focused on the solution domain, which benefits the left analytical side of your brain. And these are activities like memorize this table, complete this workbook, find the solution, and don't be wrong, right? And rarely, actually, does anybody remember Scantron? Filling out those little bubbles? Yeah. I was mildly traumatized when I remembered Scantron. Yeah. Scantron should be the poster child for the analytical left brain, right? On the other hand is the problem domain that benefits the right creative side of the brain. And I can't remember any instance where we operated in the problem domain past like the 4th grade. It was like an afterthought in my education. So again, this troubled me and I kept looking for answers to this question. And I came upon the Sternberg Triarchy. And it's by Robert Sternberg. He introduced me to the fact that you can have multiple components of your intelligence, right? And this was a concept that was refreshing to me. understanding intelligence not just as a whole, but as separate components and discrete units. Now, listen, I'm not a brain expert, okay? I've read every Wikipedia page, Reddit thread, and it turns out nobody is, right? There's conflicting information everywhere. But this made sense to me. It made a lot of sense. And I got to thinking, is it possible we're born with a natural balance between these two halves of the brain, and then somehow we educate an imbalance, right? By doing those Scantron tests, right? Over and over, repetitive tasks. And that maybe is why we have lost our creativity. So I kept thinking about this and remembering my education again. I had another traumatic event that occurred. I failed the third grade. Now, it's not easy to fail the third grade. Anybody here fail the third grade? See? Look at that. I know, I'm unique. My mom did tell me I was unique, so I guess she was right. It was dyslexia. And dyslexics have what's called a desirable disadvantage, where you read and process information from the creative right side of your brain. And I think that's how kids' brains work. When I walk in the woods with my children, a stick becomes a ray gun somehow. We've all experienced that. 2 Amazon boxes is a train, right? I didn't see that. And a raisin, well, that's a projectile if you put it in your nose and shoot it at your brother. Yeah. And that happened. Large medical bill I don't want to talk about anymore. But it got me thinking, is it possible that the way dyslexics think over and over with that right side of the brain, are they constantly exercising it and counteracting the imbalance that we put through our education system? So I began looking for evidence for that as well. And I found several studies. And it turns out that 10% of the population are dyslexic. Who's dyslexic here? Like one person, that's it, okay. But 40% of self-made millionaires are dyslexic. So there's something there. Albert Einstein, Steve Jobs, Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, Richard Branson, even Oprah, they're all dyslexic, right? Now, listen, I don't want to compare myself to those individuals, right? Just ask my kids. They'll tell you unequivocally that I don't know anything, so that should prove it. But what I do know is that we need more Edisons, and we need to focus more on creative intelligence in our education system. We need to expand that discovery process to create more of a balance. And I encourage all of you educators to go back to your local communities, start a homegrown program, right, that partners with local businesses. Use project-based learning. Even something as simple as open-ended questions will help. And I believe if we do that and just be aware that we need to expand the creative intelligence, this is our best opportunity to provide a positive outcome for our next generation. That was part 1. Okay. Part 2. I like to switch to creative behaviors. And I want to talk about the corporate world, where I think a similar imbalance exists. And as I said, in the form of creative behaviors. And I'll tell a short story, shorter than the last one, hopefully. I worked for a company, and we had clearly stopped innovating. It was obvious. The most creative individuals that I knew were leaving the company. And so I began to read a lot of books. And the books that I read about innovation and how companies fail really talked about strategy and risk. They didn't really talk about the team dynamics that I was seeing until I found The Innovator's DNA. And this book introduced me to a concept called discovery and delivery behavior groups. Now, they describe that companies are filled with two groups. The discovery group are divergent thinkers who expand the list of possible outcomes and ideas. And startups are filled with a discovery group, but most startups fail, which is a problem. And the solution to that is the other group, delivery. And they do just that, deliver, execute. And they do it very well. They do it so well, in fact, that they get promoted up the organization. And they take over. They look down the organization and they wonder what in the heck all these discovery people are doing, just sitting around discovering, creating. They don't assign any value to that whatsoever. So they eliminate them from influence or eliminate them from the company, consciously or subconsciously. And that's how famous companies in many cases fail. They have an imbalance between these two groups. Now, you don't want to be known for having the best obsolete technology, right? It's not something that you want to be known for. But it struck me, in the company I was working with, how do I identify these two groups to mitigate that outcome? So I began thinking about this, and I came up with two ways. The first way is pay attention to your next meeting that you go in. Watch the people that come in a little bit late. They eat the free lunch you provided, they dump on all your ideas, and then they fly away. Those are the Seagulls. And I didn't make this up. There's a Wikipedia page, of course there is, on seagull management, right? I mean, it's like 3 pages long. And so this seagull has become our mascot in the office. We've purchased these plush seagulls from Amazon. We have it in the conference room, and when you start dumping on ideas, we name him Steven Seagull. He gets thrown at you, right? And I've been buying them for customers for a very long time. So my Amazon algorithm on purchasing is like way off. I think 120 of these things got. So I needed something a little more scientific. And this wasn't going to do it. And then I ran into a book by Roger Van Ock. And he talks about 4 thinking preferences when you're dealing with a problem. The explorer, artist, judge, and warrior. The explorer empathizes and finds new problems. Artist is great at coming up with new ideas. The judge, analyzing and narrowing those ideas down. And then the warrior, executing. And this lined up very well with discovery and delivery. But it wasn't specific enough. So coincidentally, at the time I was struggling with this, someone thought that I needed leadership training for some reason. I don't see it. But they sent me to a leadership course on DISC. And DISC is a personality profile tool where you can identify your behaviors and preferences. If you haven't heard about it, your HR has. I know you don't want to talk to HR, right? I don't. Avoid them at all costs. But maybe email them. Maybe you don't have to talk to them, right? But DISC happened to line up perfectly with these thinking preferences and discovery and delivery. And I thought to myself, this is amazing. I have all the DISC profiles of everybody in the company historically. So I began overlaying those. And here's year 1 on that product development innovation team. It's fairly well balanced. And this is what I experienced when I was hired in. And here's year 5. Most of the discovery people had left the company. And delivery was the only thing left. That's what I saw. I saw us delivering so much that we didn't have time for discovery. So the company that I was working for, that this happened to, ended up stumbling for about 5 years, expectedly. But the same thing can happen for startups, right? You can have an overbalance of discovery individuals like Juicero, right? or Corona. They're famous examples of that. So what you need to do to mitigate this outcome is you need to measure and balance those teams. So to end this speech, I'd like to encourage the business leaders out there to build teams with creative intention that can be measured. And I believe if we can continuously balance those teams across the organization and measure them, then we'll have at least a hope of identifying and mitigating some of those outcomes. I think our biggest breakthroughs come when we first find the problem and then solve for the product. Thank you.